Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. Some of us are sort of in the recovery efforts from going to APA National in Denver this past week. It was great to see all of you that were there. I'm Carrie Fernandez. I'm the president of the California chapter of APA, and we're here in conjunction with the California Planning Roundtable. And this is a continuation of the Wildfire Recovery Series. This is our fourth installment, bringing professionals who have experienced, similar devastating wildfires and really looking to lessons learned on things that have they've learned over time and benefited them. So we're thankful to hear more from Kate and Jennifer on their experiences during and after the Maui wildfire emergency response and recovery. And I will turn it over to Rob for to kick off the series.
Great, thanks, Carrie. I'm going to make this introduction very brief. We are honored to have Kate and Jennifer, our guests today from Lahaina. They're the two planners who have led the Lahaina recovery process, although, as I'm sure they'll tell us, it's been a lot more than two planners involved in doing it. The fire in Lahaina was 17 months prior to the fires in LA. So we thought that this would be a really good chance for us to learn from their experience and get a peek at what our future might be like 17 months from now. So again, that's Kate Blystone, who's the Maui County Planning Director, and Jennifer Maiden, who leads the Maui Office of Recovery. And I will turn it over to them.
All right. Thank you, Rob, and aloha, everyone. And big mahalo for this invitation to share our experience and be a resource and be in this conversation today. Kate and I are just going to start with a little introduction to ourselves, our planning background a touch, but just kind of how we came to the recovery process for Maui and Lahaina. So I have been a planner in Maui County for approaching 20 years. First 8 years of my career was at a small consulting firm, but working quite a bit with Maui County on long-term planning projects. I spent 8 years with the county's planning department, long-range division, doing comprehensive planning and updating our community plans, including the West Maui Community Plan update. I spent a brief bit of time in our parks department doing parks planning, and that was very rejuvenative. And then with our fires in August of 23, I got called to our Office of Recovery. Our Office of Recovery was officially stood up in January of 24. I was patient zero, the first employee in the office, although lots of folks within the county were working on response and recovery from day one. I currently am not the lead of our Office of Recovery. I am an executive assistant too, which tells you nothing. I am a planner by training, but I basically work on whatever is needed in recovery under our administrator, John Smith. And I have worked very closely with Kate over the years on many different projects, but most recently over the last year plus on our long-term recovery plan. And we're honored to be here today to speak to you all. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate and she will introduce herself and kick off our presentation.
Well, hello there, folks. Aloha. My name is Kate Blystone. I am the planning director for Maui County. And I'll give a little background on my experience as well. I come from Washington State, where I was a planner, and I've been a planner for nearly 25 years, coming up very soon, and came to this profession completely by accident, but happy to still be here doing this work. My career has spanned the public, private, and nonprofit sectors of planning. I've even taught planning. But I came to Maui about 7 years ago to work with Jen in the long-range division of the Maui County Planning Department. And I was there, worked with her on the West Maui Community Plan, and eventually made my way to Hawaiʻi Community Foundation. And if you are familiar with the phrase Maui Strong or the Maui Strong Fund, that was the Hawaiʻi Community Foundation. So the morning after the fire on August 9th, that morning, we kicked off and started running hard, getting people what they needed post-fire, whether it was funding for individual nonprofits or support in other ways. We worked on that pretty hard. And then one day I went to the wrong meeting and ran into the managing director, and he says, "Hey, I want you to be planning director." And I panicked a little bit because that was never part of my plan at all, which as a planner, you know, we do a lot of planning. So I had let go of that as a possibility in my career. But when you're called, like Jen said, kind of when you're called to serve, you can't really say no. And so I stepped into this role in January after the fire. So our fire was in August, and I stepped into the role in January and have been at a dead sprint with Jen here ever since that. And so we were the co-leads for the community planning recovery support function. And what that means is it's just a team. So every time you have a disaster like this, they set up teams to work on the various aspects of recovery, infrastructure, public services, and things like that. Ours was the community planning recovery support function, and our job was to create this long-term recovery plan. And so we're going to talk about that with you today. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see, and we'll holomua together. So Jen Maiden, Kate Blystone here. You've already heard all that, and I'm going to click through, but let's talk quickly about August 8th. So a lot of you know that on August 8th, Lahaina burned down, and probably many of you are familiar with what Lahaina Town looked like prior to the fire. But in addition to that, we had that night fires pushed across our entire island in Olinda, Kula, and Kihei, with the most of the disaster occurring, the most threat to life and property happening in Kula and Lahaina. The winds were about 100 miles an hour, especially in Lahaina, pushing the fire that was burning at about 2,000 degrees. And all that night, Jen and I can tell you, we were in contact with the people we knew in Lahaina and trying to make sure everyone was okay. It was a really hard time for all of us. And for those of you that are on the call that have just experienced this in LA, we understand what you've gone through a little bit, and we're here for you. I would just want to say that out loud. We know this is tough. But the day after the fire, we got to look at what the damage was, and it was shocking to behold. Jen and I had worked really hard in Lahaina through the West Maui Community Plan process, and we knew every inch of this town when it before it burned down. We knew every TMK. We looked at every single thing, and it was horrifying to see what came up, what happened the next day. We lost more than 102 people. I think it's 104 is our total count now, but more than 100 of our neighbors and residents and family members were gone the next morning. And what I'll say though, and I don't think any of us really expected this because none of us had been through anything like this before, immediately the federal government showed up and helped. FEMA came and put their arms around our shoulders and said, "It's going to be okay. We've brought help." And one of the people that they brought to help was this gentleman here who's now in Lahaina, for those of Lahaina, LA. For those of you who are connected with Pasadena, Altadena, LA County, Palisades, you know this is Colonel Eric Swenson. He was one of the folks that helped us clean up all of this mess and give us a clean slate so that we could get started on thinking about the future. And that's really what the long-term recovery plan is all about, is thinking about the future. Jen.
All right, so jumping into what is the long-term recovery plan? So it is a way to identify and articulate the recovery goals, priorities, and needs of the community and translate it into projects and programs that essentially functionally become a high-level recovery roadmap. There's just enough detail in the long-term recovery plan to identify what is needed, but it certainly has flexibility to adapt and provide wiggle room for unexpected challenges and opportunities. And really, it gets us to identifying potential funding sources and providing really a documentation of needs and projects and where funding can be plugged in as it becomes available. That was really key to us, was identifying those needs and those projects and being ready to jump when funding was available or ready to articulate the funding that we needed. So just a little more on the purpose and the scope. So just to dive in a bit more, the long-term recovery plan really identifies priority projects and programs to ensure that there is a coordinated, holistic, and community-informed approach to achieving the community's recovery goals. It serves as a guide, both for the government, all levels of government that are involved, for the community, as well as for private partners, industry, and philanthropy, really a guide for our recovery and a way to articulate where we need to get and how we're going to get there. For us, it included county, state, private, and community recovery projects and programs and coordination with all of those entities. But it really is just a snapshot in time of recovery needs and projects. With recovering from a disaster, things move quickly. And through our process of developing the long-term recovery plan, we kept acknowledging to the community, to our council members, to everyone, that the recovery plan didn't need to be perfect. And it was just a snapshot in time, and that it would be a living document that would evolve as recovery progressed in Lahaina. And just as far as a real high level process for recovery planning, starting with a community needs assessment. And our federal partners, FEMA, helped with that in the beginning to just really identify community needs high level. We dove into our existing plans. As I'm sure you all know, you all have existing comp plans, community plans, et cetera, that articulate the needs and desires of your community. So we really dove into what do we already have that we can pull forward into the long-term recovery plan, or at least provide a nexus to. Community engagement, that was absolutely critical. And dealing with our recovery support function, or our teams, developing projects, and for us, coordination with the state was critical. And this of course is not a linear or sequential process. Many of these things, especially the community engagement and the project development, we were doing in parallel, and they were informing each other.
So speaking of community engagement, sorry, I started talking without unmuting. Community engagement was really a critical first step, but also an ongoing piece of the work that we were doing. And it's critical for any long-term recovery planning process. And I think, Jen and I said this pretty early on, but if we did our job right with the long-term recovery plan, the community really should have seen its voices in that recovery plan. And I'll give you a high overview of what that looked like next. But if you're interested in what our engagement report looked like, this is a great time to snag that QR code and take a look. But you can always find it at mauirecovers.org/Lahaina, and it'll get you where you need to go. So you can see, I'm not going to go through every little thing, but our community engagement effort started as early as January. And really, we had to move at the speed of our community. We had to know that they were ready to talk to us, because some people were just still really stressed out by the experience. And it wasn't really till January where our county council stepped in and said, let's talk story. And they had a serious public testimony piece. Sorry, that September through November, they did public testimony, and that was all synthesized in January. We took that to do a bunch of different other activities, a lot of them being online, because what we know for sure is that we lost a lot of our community when the fire happened, because we have a significant housing crisis here, and we didn't have places to house them. So they had to find places to go, and a lot of them we lost to the continent or other islands. So online components of community engagement were critical. We also did a number of neighborhood workshops, and those workshops were the core of what we did. We had an online version of that as well, but we also had these 5 neighborhood workshops where we went out and we used for those of you who are familiar with community engagement techniques, we used the World Cafe model, and had a facilitator and a scribe at each table talking about individual topics related to recovery. After that, we did some work with we took all that data, we started drafting the plan, and we'll get more into that. But later after this, and even beyond what's shown on this slide, these slides, we did some follow-up after we had a draft published. We did open houses for that as well. So community engagement was a common thread through our entire process. So what did that end up looking like is, so there were about 12,000 people displaced by the fire, to just give you a sense of what the numbers were. So through our community engagement, through both, through everything that you saw on the screen, plus everything that was done post-draft, we had about 4,100 people engaged across 12 different activities. So that included those 5 neighborhood workshops that I discussed, and we had 900 participants just in those workshops alone. We did 3 online surveys, which resulted in 2,700 respondents. And we also we did one-on-one conversations or small group interviews with 190 folks. And that's really important, especially for our older people. They don't think of things, they're not as tech savvy out here, and they don't think of things the same way that we think about them. A survey isn't meeting them where they're at. So we had to go meet them where they were at with those 190 interviews. And once we had the draft plan, we had about 300 people participate in our open house. And that was critical feedback that we got as we were going through the process.
So to just dive a bit more into our process, in parallel with doing our community engagement, we were working behind the scenes within the county and coordinating with our state, within our teams, within our recovery support functions. We developed projects, and we categorized them around short, mid, and long term. And it was 60 plus projects. Over time, we combined, narrowed down, but essentially we went through an intensive workshop, half-day workshop with our recovery support function leads, with key folks from the state, to really go through these projects and programs to identify what would be highlighted in the long-term recovery plan. And we came up with a review process to identify what projects, and we called them right, ready, and required, right, and ready. We developed this, but it really helped all of us dive into the projects and really filter out what needed to be in the plan. And as far as required, what was required of these what was required to really get our community back to where they needed to be. For example, one is rebuilding our elementary school. A right project was really identified by our community as critical, or our recovery support functions as critical to happen. And ready, it was developed to a certain degree. Perhaps it was even a project that previously was underway, but that helped us identify and thin down the projects to get into the recovery plan. And ultimately, in the end, in our recovery plan, we have 40 projects. But it was quite a process internally in the county and with the state and with the support of our federal partners, but then in parallel to our community engagement process. And they both very much fed off of each other to get us to the place of having a recovery plan that was actionable. And just going forward, we constantly gave the message to our community. And so it was new having the Office of Recovery. As I mentioned, the Office of Recovery was stood up in January, after the fire, January of 24. And so our role going forward, we will be tracking the implementation of the recovery projects. We'll also be providing updates to the community, to council, to folks that need to know what's the progress on these projects and programs. And we use our Maui Recovers website as kind of our central hub. And we acknowledge that there will be a need to, as needs, conditions, funding, community feedback evolves, we will update the long-term recovery plan in the coming years. And this is some of the messaging that we gave to the community after we shared with them the draft long-term recovery plan, heard their feedback. We let them know that we would have, and we did deliver when we hesitate calling it the final long-term recovery plan because it never really is final. It is a living guide and document to take us to recovery. But we would have the updated draft by December, and we did that. And we developed project pages on our Maui Recovers Ola Lahaina page. So there really could be dynamic viewing of the projects going forward. And we let the community know that this wasn't the end of engagement. This was really the beginning. This was developing that roadmap, but then real critical engagement would be coming forward with the development and implementation of the projects within the recovery plan.
So taking us home, so we wanted to save a bunch of time for your questions, but Jen and I came up with a few lessons learned as a result of what we went through to create this long-term recovery plan. Really, the process should be community-led and government-supported. That means that you follow the lead of your community. When they're ready to go, you go, and you're constantly checking in with them to make sure that you're meeting their expectations. We learned really quickly that you move at the speed of trust, that people won't trust you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to come with you along on this journey. And you need their feedback in order to do this plan justice. So you've got to build trust, and that means meeting them where they are. It means doing what you say you're going to do in the way that you say you're going to do it. It's asking for their opinion and making adjustments based on that opinion. So I can't stress that enough, moving at the speed of trust. Keep it simple and accessible, meaning that, you may have 30 questions for your community when you do this plan, but they are getting hundreds of questions a day from FEMA, from their insurance companies, from their families, from their doctors, from everyone, from their contractors. So when you're asking them to think about the future and how rebuilding goes, they need to have, it needs to be really simple. In our case, I didn't mention this earlier, when we were doing our community engagement in the early phases, we asked them 2 questions. We said, when Lahaina's rebuilt, what do you want to go back exactly the way it was? And what do you want to change? What was not working for you? And through those 2 questions, we learned so much about that community and what the projects were that we needed to focus on. So keeping it simple is really important, and making it accessible to all of your community members in different languages. If you're doing a survey, do it in different languages. If you're doing a public meeting, have translators available for all of the different languages, including hearing impaired folks. Make it accessible for folks. Feedback loops are critical. And I think as planners, we know that it's important to collect public comment, synthesize that comment, turn it back to the community and say, we think we heard this, and then get feedback on that. And that's another way to build trust. So build in those feedback loops. We got a lot of pushback. I mean, we talk about how this was all rosy, but Jen and I spent a lot of time answering the same questions from people inside our tent, people who we worked with every day on these recovery support functions, who worked for the county, who were like, why are we doing this? This is such a waste of time. We need to stop planning and start doing and all of these things. But now this is a model. This plan that we've created, we're hearing from HUD, is a model for how to do long-term recovery planning. And as a result of that, we're going to have this plan that we can constantly refer to, and we are already constantly referring to. When a pot of money comes up, we can say, oh, we've got this project that's perfect for it. So it's worth the time it takes. And Jen and I really want to make sure you understand, especially for folks who are, if you end up going through one of these disasters, FEMA is going to show up. FEMA Community Assistance specifically for planners is going to show up. Take their help. They, for us, were the reason we were able to do this plan. We could not have done this without them. They offered us time, they offered us advice, they offered us support. I can't tell you how many times one of those guys, though, would say, like, we think you should do it this way. And I could be able to say, no, you're wrong. This isn't our community. And they're like, all right, let's just do it the way you want. This is what I think we're trying to get to. They were really supportive and helpful. And Preeti Shah is the head of the group that we worked with, but there are a lot of great people at FEMA Community Assistance, and highly recommend using them when they come to help you out. And it's important to say that perfection is not the goal here. All of us planners are constantly trying, especially long-range planners, to think about every possible scenario and make the most perfect, beautiful plan. That's not what this is. This plan, as Jen has said multiple times, is meant to grow and change over time. It's meant to have projects that fall off because they're no longer needed or because you've completed them. You're going to uncover new projects that you need, and you should be able to add those. So don't make perfection the goal. Make good your goal, and go forward with that plan and adjust it over time, as Jen had said. So that's for me for lessons learned. Jen, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add.
I'll just build upon moving at the speed of trust. It was not only with our community, it was also within the county, as Kate mentioned, like as far as with our mayor, with our directors, that we're not convinced that going the route of developing a long-term recovery plan was the right route. Really understanding and listening to them, like, why are they having these concerns, and really building their trust and having feedback loops with them to really get them on board and why this plan would help them in their mission and what they needed to achieve and how they were serving the community in their day-to-day tasks. And absolutely, again, just to stress the support of FEMA Community Assistance and the other federal partners that came. They came to help. There was never a question that we were absolutely leading the process with our community, and FEMA was there to support, but they were absolute necessary capacity that we would not have been able to achieve this without them.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I appreciate that. So mahalo nui loa, that means thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll stop sharing screen, and I think we're going to turn to questions.
Great. Well, thanks. This was really good. And I have a lot of questions, and then at some point I'll switch over to pulling them off the chat. I had some things in mind first, but your last comment, I wanted to follow on that. So basically, your colleagues there in the various other staff, other departments, et cetera, in Maui County, they were questioning why you were doing this, as you said, and you had to convince them of the value of planning. So what were the most convincing, the main arguments that you relied on?
I'll start. You may have to ask them though, right? So
Right.
I would say the thing that was most convincing was persistence. I mean, just constantly answering the same questions over and over again. And for those of you who have experienced disasters, working with survivors, you're getting the same questions over and over and over again because people are tired, people are fried. And Jen and I exercised a level of patience with our colleagues because we knew how important this was. And we wanted to make sure they were coming along with us. But also, too, at a certain point, we had to just keep going. And sometimes the most convincing argument is showing people the value of it. So we brought some of them into our workshops. So they participated in the workshops. They were able to interact with survivors and see why this is important, because a lot of them stay in their cubicle or stay looking at their maps or looking at their schematics. I don't know what other departments do, but they just focus on their thing, and going out and spending time with survivors in this way and thinking about the future got them a little jazzed about it. So those are my couple things. Jen, I don't know if you have others.
I'll just tack on to that one of our largest challenges was working with our public works director, and his sentiment that why are we going to develop another plan that's not going to be implemented, and what this is a waste of time when our community needs us to build back things. And we really worked with him to hear, what are you working on? What does your department need to do to serve this community in recovery? And we would listen and work with what he was saying and morph that into projects and programs so that he could see that his needs fit with long-term recovery and that the vehicle of getting it done could be the long-term recovery plan, so that it was laid out but with that holistic view of his infrastructure projects connected to housing, connected to social services, connected to environmental and cultural preservation, to see that bigger picture. I don't want to speak for him, but I think it really was that constant communication and really listening to what his concerns were and how this plan could be actionable, and that it was going to get to getting these projects done and getting them funded.
Good to see your fellow staff members are all, it's part of the process. You need to listen to their needs and you need to respond to their needs as well. So along these lines, so you were obviously you were doing this plan at the same time that everybody, and I mean everybody meaning organizations, individuals, businesses, etc. Everyone was making their own decisions regarding reconstruction, debris clearance was going on. People are drawing plans, getting permits, et cetera, et cetera. And so you had to, I have sort of, it's a two-part question. One is, you know, how did you compete for attention? How did you get, particularly like in the public involvement, how did you get people to see that that long-range planning for recovery was important while they're busy dealing with all the immediate issues? And then, you know, and then in what ways, I mean, you've touched on this already, but to amplify, in what ways doing this, having these planning conversations, having this process going on at the same time the reconstruction was going, how did that help to inform and support those efforts?
I'll just start with saying that I don't think we ever looked at it as competing for attention. We definitely knew that we needed to be very sensitive and respectful of our community members' time and just bandwidth to have conversations. And we did start to feel in the community that people were starting to want to talk about the future. And once we started to get to hear that, we knew we were ready to kick off an engagement process to develop long-term projects. But while we did that, particularly at those neighborhood workshops that Kate spoke to, there was a lot of one-on-one and small group conversations with survivors. And when you're asking them, what did you love about your community? What do you want to come back? What needs to change? Oftentimes, they just got into telling their story of their experience of the fire and what family members they lost or their home or just their personal story. And we were there, and it was mixed up where you would hear their concerns of getting FEMA's help and their concerns of how am I going to build back? And you would hear tidbits of everything, of their immediate needs to how they build back to their home, to I care about these cultural resources and how we mitigate fire in our brushlands around the town. You would hear everything. And that's our job as a planner, to be able to synthesize and deliver that information. What goes into the long-term recovery plan? What information do we need to give to our emergency management agencies right now? What questions do we need to bring up with the folks that were providing immediate support to the survivors? So we really saw it as respecting the community's time and coming to them when they were ready.
Yeah, just to tack on a tiny bit about the permitting side of it, because my department is responsible for permitting within the special management area. We also handle zoning, but when it comes to building permits, that's handled through our Public Works Department through Development Services Administration. So fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately for long-range planning, and unfortunately for people trying to rebuild, we have really complicated permitting processes here in Hawaii. So it gave us a little breathing room to be able to do a process like this. And we were able to channel all the energy that was focused on, why aren't you able to process my permit in 2 weeks, to I need to think about the future. I need to think about more than just my house right now. And like Jen said, it was for many of those conversations, it was sitting down with a survivor and hearing their story and picking out the pieces from that story that helped move forward with the long-term recovery plan. But for me as planning director and for my colleagues within this department, it was going like, oh, shoot, this system is broken. We need to work on this system and fix this system. So it wasn't hard. Like Jen said, it wasn't hard to get people to focus. Fortunately, we just finished the West Maui Community Plan in 2022. So they were accustomed to thinking about long-range planning. So it was just a matter of tapping back into that energy again.
And I just would like to add one more thing. From the very get-go, our mayor made the goal of getting people back to their homes and not trying to do everything we could to not lose people to other islands, to the continent, to keep our community intact, because that really is the heart of Lahaina, is the people. So outside of the special management area, the shoreline area, the county really did focus on expediting our permit process to allow people to start to rebuild, to start to plan for their rebuild. So I think our county did a really good job of moving as quickly as we could in the areas that we could, and doing the long range planning, and considering towards our historic districts, our shoreline area, our special management area, how do we move forward in those areas, but to really try to do what we could to keep people here and help them work towards rebuilding their homes.
I'm hearing a few things here. So for one, it was just a good time to talk. You mentioned that, you know, there was this investigation the first few months, and obviously right early on, the shock is really overwhelming. But starting at about 4 months, people were starting to there's still the shock and the trauma, but they're starting to think ahead, and they really need a way to talk about it and what they're going to do about it. And as you said, at the same time, sort of processing what happened, but it's also time to look ahead. And so it sounds like, so it was just a good opportunity for them to talk. But paired along with that, it sounds, I think you were saying that also it was really good for them to be talking to the folks who are representing the government, which, as you said, there's good things and there's slow bureaucratic things going on, and often it can be really frustrating. And so they valued that they knew that you were listening to them. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think
Okay.
that's very true. Yep.
Okay, good. Well, that sounds like a good lesson from this. So let's let's see. No, I won't go to the chat yet. The next, but I want to ask, and you've touched on it. So that was then, and now is now. And so you have touched on how you're using the plan now, but if you could say a little more about, how this is being used, what the ongoing activities are, and it's a living document. So have you been revising it already? What are the current activities and priorities?
Absolutely. So our community, we are in the process of developing the action plan for receiving the CDBG-DR, the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery funding from HUD, the 1.6 billion. So we have a draft plan. It's been out for review and comment. We're revising it and moving forward with finalizing that plan to utilize that money from HUD. I haven't been intimately involved in that plan development, but I have been hearing from my colleagues and folks who have been that the long-term recovery plan has been indispensable in their development of that plan. That being able to, for the community engagement process, to hear what the community said, and for the projects, to be able to pick the projects and build upon the projects. So they're not starting with a blank slate, but they have this list of 40 comprehensive projects to build from and fit them into the HUD guidelines. And we have heard from multiple people that the long-term recovery plan has been critical to move fast to get that HUD money and develop the action plan. Also, more locally with our county budget, I know Office of Recovery and our other departments, including planning, have used the long-term recovery plan to identify projects to implement. to put forth for requests to County Council for budgeting purposes going forward. And also just as funding opportunities have arisen, to look to the long-term recovery plan and point and say, okay, here's a project that's partly in development, and be able to plug in funding. I've been hearing that it's been critical for that. We have not moved towards revising the plan yet. I could see that happening more at the year mark, perhaps. But as far as moving forward, some of the short-term projects in the long-term recovery plan, we are moving forward on getting consultants on board, building out what those projects will be for implementation and continuing engagement with the community.
Yeah, just to tack on a tiny bit there too, the planning department. So throughout the plan, and we didn't have the plan up because we could do a deep dive for all day on what's in the plan, but some of the aspects of the plan include assignment. So the word for responsibility here is kuleana, and kuleana means, like I said, responsibility. So there are state projects, there are county projects, and even within the county assignment, and sometimes they're both state and county projects. So one project has multiple folks responsible for it. And then we have leads for those. So like Jen said, we're using the long-term recovery plan, especially for short-term projects, to put those into our budget. We're going through that budgeting process now. But in the planning department, we have a couple projects that are assigned to us or that we're part of. And one of the biggest ones that Jen and I are going to embark upon soon is the Rebuild Lahaina plan, which is a deep dive into the community. We heard high level that Front Street, for those of you who are familiar with Front Street, that Front Street was working in a lot of ways and not working in a lot of ways through our long-term recovery planning process and the community engagement. So now our next step is to dive deeper into what that means. So when we rebuild Front Street, what do we want that to look and feel like? What do the community spaces feel like? How will it be different? One great example is the sidewalks were super narrow, right? Because it was built before cars, and so people would walk everywhere, and so they didn't need, you didn't need these wide sidewalks because they were just walking in the street. So we have a chance to do better, and so having this Rebuild Lahaina plan is the next phase and one of the big projects in the community or in the long-term recovery plan.
Well, you've convinced me that the long-term recovery plan is really valuable. I just want to say using that as the basis for the CDBG action plan, that seems like a really obvious thing. And I just, without naming any names, it's rarely done this way. I'm glad you're doing it. It could be a good positive model that can help to make sure that we do it this way in the future. Let me look at the chat, and there's a question that's been here for a while. So let me do that from Shannon, which is, with multiple recovery projects proposed, how do you ensure that implemented projects won't increase risk to multiple hazards like flooding? Has the future land use map changed with consideration for risk?
That is a great question, and something that is, as planning director, keeps me up all night long, all the time, because the worst thing that we could do is rebuild Lahaina exactly as it was. And part of the reason I say that is Jen and I, working on this West Maui community plan, there were things that we learned through our research about the future for Lahaina, and we frankly anticipated at some point some major coastal hazard was going to damage Lahaina. That's where, if something was going to happen to Lahaina, it was probably going to be that. Fire was always a risk. We had policies related to that and actions related to that in the West Maui community plan. But coastal hazards were certainly an issue. One of the things that we did just a couple months after the disaster, after 10 years, we updated our shoreline rules and our special management area rules for the Planning Commission. And those shoreline rules adopted something called the erosion hazard line as our shoreline. So we did a study to see where the erosion, I'm not going to go into deep detail on this because it's like a whole nother webinar, but basically this line is really progressive. We're looking at a pretty significant hazard area, and we're using that line to kind of help with our permitting process going forward. It's really tricky though, because the pressure that we're feeling is to rebuild quickly. So this is the pressure that folks who are on the call from LA are probably hearing as well, right? That you want it done fast and not thinking about this resiliency. But it's our job as planners to pump the brakes a little bit and constantly be inserting, how do we think about this in a resilient way? How do we protect people? How do we protect our resources and our infrastructure going forward? And that is my job, to constantly pump the brakes. Sometimes I fail, and sometimes I get a good win, but I can't answer specifically, these are the 5 things that we're doing, because they're still in flux, because we're still in the process. The place that's going to recover or rebuild last is going to be the shoreline. It's going to be those coastal areas, simply because of the way our processes are built. So that's some of the ways, and we will be looking at, as far as changing the future land use map, that adopting that erosion hazard line was critical for us. Yeah, it changed the shape of how we do permitting in the shoreline.
Jennifer? No. Okay. Okay, another question here. So you had talked about, you divided the actions into various timeframes. So there's a question wanting to know what some of the first ones are, the shortest term recovery plans that you implemented for more immediate actions. If you can remember that far back.
Trying to pull it up, but my laptop's too small. But some of our short-term recovery projects are, like Kate mentioned, developing the Rebuild Lahaina Plan, really focusing on Front Street and our commercial core. And how do we build that back more resiliently, and to really serve the local community and welcome in visitors, but really serve the local community. So an urban design plan for the core of Lahaina Town. Other short-term projects are building a memorial, or at least starting to plan for a memorial. Also, energy resiliency. Man, while Kate and I have done this presentation and done this talk so many times, we also have jumped onto so many other things, and my deep memory of all the intricacies of the long-term recovery plan, it's amazing how things fade and you move on.
Do you want to assist, Jen?
Some of our, we have a National Historic Landmark District in Lahaina. So updates to that is another one of our short-term projects that will really inform redevelopment within that district, in that burn area. Affordable rental housing programs. We had, I believe it was 6 or 7 critical multifamily affordable rental housing projects that burnt down. So working together to finance and build those back. Healthcare service expansion is another one. Let's see, and it really are infrastructure assessments and improvement studies really tied to the Rebuild Lahaina Plan. Those are some of the key ones that are short-term projects.
But I think the question also too is about immediate relief. And I think it's important to say too that the long-term recovery plan is not about immediate relief. It is about long-term recovery. So the immediate relief that the county provided and the state provided and all of the nonprofits that were working in this space provided was really just like, I hate to it was, I don't have any good terms that don't use swear words, but it's just everyone pushing hard and everyone staying in their lane and doing the best they could for their community. So it was about, Hawaiʻi Community Foundation pumping out money to all the nonprofits that were working in this space. It was about the county organizing their resources so we could get water turned back on in places and get food, distributed to places and all the kinds of things. And I think we learned a lot from this process, so that next time a disaster comes, and let's be honest about it, everyone on this is going to be the new arc of our careers. Everyone who's on this call will be hit by a disaster at some point, and we will have to deal with that disaster. And learning from each other is really important, and learning from past experience is really important. So next time we get hit with a disaster, we're going to be in much better shape than we were last time. And it's because of all those systems and infrastructure. It's the everyone working together. So there's a saying in Hawaii, "Ohe hana nui ke alo ia." Is that right? Yeah, something like that. And it means no job is too big or too big when done together by all. And that's really what, when it comes to immediate relief, it was everyone working together.
Great, thanks. Let's see. And then there's one more question I have here on the chat. So we know that I mean eventually, there's various sources of money along the way, but certainly initially there's initial need for money, and immediately there's loss of property tax revenue. So I don't know, maybe this isn't quite your guys' department, but the question was for what immediate funding sources were used to help assist with that initial loss of property taxes.
You want me to try, Jen? So we don't know. But what I will say is that there was this is where FEMA and our federal partners really come in, is that we could not have done the community engagement effort we did without their support. Like they provided us bodies and endless amounts of times and iterations of poster boards and all kinds of things. So usually that would be funded out of the county general fund, and it was funded just from support from FEMA. So I would say that like the immediate aftermath, we did that. And so for loss of property taxes, yeah, we stopped collecting property taxes on these properties while they're burnt down. That, of course, the whole other piece of this is like the insurance and mortgages, and that's an entire whole nother webinar on its own. But that support from the federal government was critical. And I'll even give a shout out to our philanthropic partners, because they were constantly looking at ways to throw money at this. So one of the things we got was Hawaii Community Foundation paid for food for our workshops, because it's such a pain in the butt to get food out of the county government. Like it's like a act of Congress to get food, but they were able to just go, oh yeah, you need food, here you go. Other groups helped us with volunteer support. Other people gave us, mental health support for folks who are working. So yeah, it's not always about money. Sometimes it's just about the bodies. I don't know if you had more to say, Jen.
Just that, yeah, I know that immediately we, of course, were not feeling the loss of the tax revenues, the property tax revenues. That's to come. And Kate and I honestly are not involved in that level of discussion, but we are aware of it. So definitely, as we were offered support from federal agencies and philanthropic, we tried to figure out where that could be plugged in. Sometimes it was exhausting to be reached out to continuously. Oh, how can I help you in this way? And sometimes you don't even know the support that you need, but to try to work with, okay, if this money or this assistance is coming to us, how can we use it? Because this isn't going to last forever.
So I have a question that I think you can answer. So we have a lot of planners on the line here. Obviously, that's what this is about. And I think it would be interesting for you to tell us about your personal experiences as planners. You're involved in this very high stakes planning situation in so many ways, obviously different from anything you've ever done before. And how's it gone? What's it been like?
I'll start. I was not trained for this, like none of this at all. Like my background is in long range planning. It's not immediate disaster relief and emergency planning. How is it gone? Jen and I have worked together for a really long time now. I mean, we're very young, so very, like 7 years is a really long time. And I think that's the best part of this experience, that because we work so well together, because she has strengths that I don't have, and I have strengths that she doesn't have, we were able to like dream team this sucker together. And with the team we had between FEMA Community Assistance and their consultant was Jacobs Consulting, Jacobs Engineering, we were able to do something that we had never done before. And there were a couple times where I think we looked at each other and we're like, oh God, this is insane. Like what we're doing is insane. This timeline is bonkers. And the resources we're having to marshal are, this is impossible. It feels impossible. But at the same time, there was no time for that. We just did it because that's what we had to do. We knew we had a plan and we knew what we needed to do. We planned that work and we worked that plan. We made adjustments as we were going along. And I'll say, like, this has been the hardest thing I've ever done is taking on this role of planning director, but also taking on this role in recovery. And it really matters that you have a partner in that work. And I say this to all planners because none of us are good on our own. That's the best part about planning. We're group thinkers. We work best together and we recognize the power of thinking together. And having a partner like Jen to go through this with was pretty incredible. And so how's it going? We're doing all right. We're doing all right. It's not perfect, but we're doing all right.
I'll just add on that when I took on the role coming to the Office of Recovery a little over a year ago in January of last year, it was kind of portrayed, you know, there was a staffing design of about 8 people in the Office of Recovery, but I was number 1. And my role was going to be supporting recovery support functions. I was going to support community planning. I was going to support natural and cultural resources. As I got into it, and we did not have a recovery manager at this point in time, and our managing director was doing triple duty. Everyone was way overtapped. And I stepped into this, you know, project, or the position description didn't matter. So I really learned to just embrace the uncertainty, and to trust that I had skills, that I had knowledge that could serve this, even though I had never worked on a disaster. I had never done this work before. My planning, training, and experience really fed into it. And the work that we've done in long range planning, just working across departments, working with the state, realizing how many networks and connections and ability to break down silos we already had, and how critical that was in recovery planning, to really see systems, to that was absolutely critical, and to listen and to genuinely care about the future and recovery of our community. There's so many parts of being a planner that just connect with recovery planning that I never would have known until I was immersed into it.
Is there any advice that you could give to some planners in the LA area? So some of them are being overwhelmed with various jobs, but in some ways, you know, there's still a need perhaps for some of the planners to assert themselves a little more in terms of some of the great value they can provide, as you've described that you've done in Lahaina. I don't know if there's any words of wisdom that you could pass on to some of them who I hope are on the line here today.
I think the biggest piece of advice I would offer is just keep doing your best and know that it's your best, right? And you're not going to win everything, and you're not going to get people to see your way, because they're, like I said earlier, like I'm certain the pressure, I know this because I was just there. I was just in Pasadena and Altadena. And I know the pressure to rebuild immediately is really strong. And do your best to keep telling the story that you know is true. Do your best to keep listening to survivors and their stories. Do your best every single day to keep thinking about the future. And when you lose, figure out a way around it. So for example, I lost a big thing, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I lost a big thing, a big battle. And so all I've been thinking about it since I lost it is how to get around what I just lost. We're creative. Just keep being creative, and keep thinking about your job, which is to protect health, safety, and general welfare. That's your job. And keep that in mind, and you're never going to be wrong.
And through all of this, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Absolutely. I mean, I know we all hear that, you know, that you have to put on your oxygen mask first, but it is just so true that, I mean, our planning work in general, we give so much and we care so much, and recovery work is exhausting. But to listen to yourself when you need a break, to lean on your colleagues, and to also lean on the broader community. We tapped into communities that had gone through disasters for advice in developing the long-term recovery plan and other things. Our FEMA community assistance really connected us with other communities that had gone through this. And we are in that position now where we're connecting with LA and North Carolina and others, and providing that support. So really know that you're not alone, but that you also need to take care of yourself so you can take care of your community.
Yeah, and just to that point about knowing you're not alone, I put Jen's and my emails in the chat. We are always happy to talk story with you. Happy to think through issues that you're going through, and just be a real support for you, because we know this is hard and you're tired and you need someone outside of the circumstances. We're happy to be that resource for you.
That was really outstanding advice from both of you to tie a ribbon around this. So we're at time, and that was really a great way to end it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You both. And I just want to quickly mention that we have a webinar already scheduled for April 18th, and it's going to be, the title is Wildfire Recovery and Rebuilding After the 2021 Dixie Fire. So hopefully you can all join us then. Thank you so much.
And the recording will be on the fire recovery page on the APA California website after it's been edited.
As
Thanks
are
for that.
all the previous ones.
That's right. Have a great weekend.
Great.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.